April 2nd, 1985. While being transported to a court hearing on a murder charge, a man would attempt a daring escape from custody with a firearm smuggled to him. He would shoot and kill a lawyer in the courthouse before taken into custody by police. He was in court after being charged with the killing of a bartender at Cheers Tavern in Salt Lake City during a robbery which netted less than $100. This would lead to the last execution in the United States by firing squad. On this episode of Chasing Killers, we'll be exploring the life and death of Ronnie Lee Gardner. Let's get into it. Gardner was born on January 16, 1961. His story would begin in Salt Lake City, Utah. He would be the youngest of 7 children. His father, Dan, was a heavy drinker and left his mother when he was only 18 months old. Gardner was dumped in the streets by his mother, wearing only a diaper at the time. The abuse would continue by his older siblings. Like many killers, his juvenile delinquency would begin early. He would have an involuntary commitment at Utah State Hospital. Gardner would describe himself during this time as a nasty little bugger. Gardner would also spend time at Utah State Industrial School as a teen. Following his release, he was placed in foster care, where that pair would also abuse him. Gardner would later note that even with the abuse, this was the most stable time of his life. From 1977 to 1980, he lived with his girlfriend, with whom he had 2 children. Gardner's first prison stint would begin in February 1980 for a robbery conviction. He was housed at Utah State Prison, and in 1983 was thought to be the ringleader in a major disturbance at the prison. While being treated at the University of Utah Hospital for an illness he faked, he would escape, almost killing the transportation officer. Gardner was a dangerous man, and this wouldn't stop with his escape. On October 9, 1984, Gardner would walk into Cheers Tavern in Salt Lake City and rob the bartender. He would also shoot Melvin Otterstrom in the face, killing him. The getaway driver in the crime would turn against him and testify in open court. It is safe to assume that Gardner knew he had no shot of a not guilty outcome in the trial and needed to take an extreme measure. Although not positively known, Gardner may have received a life sentence for the murder had not it been for his next crime. On April 2, 1985, he would be transported to court for the continued trial. A revolver was somehow smuggled to him and he would attempt his escape. Gardner would be immediately shot in the chest by the transport officer, but that wouldn't stop him. He would fire back and strike the bailiff, who would survive. Gardner made his way to the courtroom archives, where he would shoot a lawyer who was there in a completely unrelated matter. He would not survive. Gardner would go out the front door and be immediately taken into custody. Upon exiting the courthouse, he said, "Don't shoot, I don't have a gun." He would now face trial on 2 separate murders. In June 1985, Gardner would plead guilty to the bar robbery and receive life without parole. His next trial would determine if the state would take his life. Gardner would claim mental duress as the reason he killed the lawyer in the courthouse. The jury would not bite, and on October 22, 1985, he would be found guilty. The verdict took less than 3 hours for the jury to reach. He would then receive his sentence, death. At the time, Utah law allowed for the defendant to choose their manner of death. Gardner would tell the judge, "I'd prefer to die of old age, Your Honor, but if that ain't possible, I'll take the firing squad." If you enjoy my death row profiles, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. Gardner would be transferred to Utah State Prison and his time on death row would begin. He would be a problem for staff throughout his time there. On September 25, 1994, Gardner would become intoxicated on prison alcohol and shank another inmate, Richard Fats Thomas, with a shiv he made out of his sunglasses. Thomas would survive, barely. Gardner's appeals would wind through the court system. The Utah Supreme Court would end all of his appeals on June 14, 2010, and 3 days later, the United States Supreme Court would do the same, setting the course towards his execution. The Utah governor, Gary Herbert, would have the final say of clemency. Herbert would comment that Gardner had a full and fair opportunity in court. Clemency would be denied. June 18, 2010 would be the last day on earth for Gardner. On most execution, the inmate would receive his final meal on his final day, but Gardner was observing a spiritual fast and received his final meal 2 days prior. He ate a last meal of steak, lobster tail, apple pie, vanilla ice cream, and 7-Up. Gardner would be visited by a Mormon bishop. And at 12:15 a.m., Gardner would be executed by firing squad. When asked if he had any last words, he would respond, "I do not know." It was performed by 5 volunteer police officers, one of which fired a wax bullet, ensuring that no one knew for certain who killed Gardner. A candlelight vigil was held outside the prison, with the classic Freebird playing on a loudspeaker. Gardner's attorney would say, ultimately his children and grandchildren got their chance to express their love for him. I'm not sure Ronnie had a lot of love in his life. At least in the end there, he got that. This was another Chasing Killers profile. Thanks for watching. See you next time.